So when I began this campaign, I did a survey, 10 simple questions, and it went out to thousands of voters, and I've gotten hundreds of responses back to that survey. I've also knocked on over 5,000 doors in all parts of the city. The number one thing I hear is crime, especially violent crime in the city. That would be my number one priority. And what would I do about that priority? Immediately upon winning the primary, I will establish a summit on violence prevention. And in that summit, I would pull together our safety professionals, city council, the nonprofit community, the faith community, the education community, and business leaders. And I would say to them, all right, we're in this room, what are we going to do? And we would bring a plan forward. And we would look at different things in that plan. We would look at what action items can we take about the root crime, the root of those crimes, funding, approach, community policing, youth programming, and those type of things in our community. So that when the day I become mayor, we can immediately put those action plans into place.
And how do we make Harrisburg more equitable for those who are struggling financially, with the pandemic and everything that's been going on lately?
Inequality exists, and it's heartbreaking in our city. If you drive around our city in the 22 neighborhoods, it's almost like there's an invisible line drawn between where it is and where it isn't. So what do? We have to create opportunity in the city. What does that opportunity look like? It starts with jobs. It starts with growing businesses that are already here to provide jobs. So the first thing I would do is create the Minority Entrepreneurship and Small Business Growth Office, so that everyone in this city knows you want to do business here in the city, you want to create a business in the city, go to that office, because we will have an efficient process for you to set up a business or continue. Most importantly, we'll have financing available to help small businesses start and grow. We'll also have mentorships in that piece. The other piece is on the jobs front is we need a trade school in the city. We need that trade school for high school students. We need that trade school for adults who want to change careers. How would we do that? We'd create a public-private partnership with businesses in the region. They are desperate for workers in things like HVAC, plumbing, electrical, those type of things. We need to establish that here in the city to help our young people look at and consider careers. There's also an educational component to that. We need to start in our schools to educate students about the opportunities that are out there. Not every student can and want to go to college, but there's got to be other options available to them. We can create that in the city.
What is the main thing you would do as mayor to help the city recover from the pandemic and COVID-19?
Well, unfortunately, if we're starting already behind. If I were mayor now, I would have started 6 months ago with that plan. And that plan has to have two components. First of all, internally, right now the city is bleeding millions of dollars. Think of what that millions of dollars could do for our city going forward. We're not talking about how the COVID impact, what the COVID has had as far as an impact on city finances, because it definitely has. We're not getting event revenue. We're not getting business revenue. We have a number of businesses who have gone out of business. So we should have a plan, because coming out of COVID, the business landscape in this city is going to look different than before COVID, mainly because of the work at home. How is that going to affect our city and the businesses that are in our city? So that's the first thing. I'd be looking at the revenue generation. Where is the money going to come from? The second piece of that planning is, all right, which again should already be happening, but when I become mayor, I'll quickly ramp that up to get it in place. We still don't have vaccine coverage in the city. We need to make sure that vaccines are available for all our residents. We need to get back to, all right, jobs. Our city has a higher unemployment rate than the region. Where are our jobs going to be for people to get them up on their feet as soon as possible? And then we need to be talking about what's our future going to look like. So we need to put a plan in place as far as where is the revenue generation going to come from, and it's non-tax revenue generation, to make sure we can provide the services that this city requires to continue running for its residents.
Just switching gears here, what is the best way for the city to tackle issues with gun violence?
Well, I talked about my summit on violence that I would do even before I hit office so that we have those action points right away. A big piece of that is going to be community policing. And if you study community policing, there's several components to that. First of all, most people think of community policing as officers in our communities. On those doors that I've knocked on, those 5,000 doors of the people I've talked to in all 22 neighborhoods, it doesn't matter where I am, they say, Dave, we need to see officers in our neighborhood. We need to have them patrolling on a regular basis. They need to know us. We need to know them. It's a relationship. So we need a park, walk, and talk program with those officers in the neighborhood. But it goes beyond that. We need to have people from our neighborhoods at the table and creating a relationship between the city, the police, and our neighborhoods, and do that proactively instead of when an incident happens, then we have to be reactive. Let's talk ahead of time about what it looks like, what our policing needs to be, and how we handle those situations. We also need to have officers who look like our community. This city police force right now, less than 10% of our officers look like the neighborhoods in our city. That's got to be a priority as well. We also need to look at what are the duties and what type of officers do we need in our city. We need to pay attention to mental health issues within our community and how our officers respond. We need to have training for our officers so that they can deal with the mental health issues, that they can be racially trained and sensitive to those areas, and we also need to work on non-aggressive items to work on crime in our city.
And what more do you think needs to be done to help keep younger members of the community out of trouble?
Well, I'm going to respectfully disagree with you how that question was phrased, because what more needs to be done? We're not doing anything right now from a city perspective. This city used to have a very robust program for young people, after school, weekends, and during the summer. We need to get back to that. How do we fund that? Public-private partnerships again. Many businesses in our region would be more than happy to be involved with creating youth programming in the city. But it goes beyond youth programming as far as sports, arts and culture, the sciences, that type of thing. We also need to create jobs for our youth in the summer, in the city. Summer jobs for young people, whether it's working in parks and rec, whether it's working in public works, or setting up programs with businesses within the city to work. That's the key. We need to have activity for our young people. And the goal is not only having activities or not only finding summer work for our young people, but it's also opening their eyes to what opportunities are out there for them. We have a phenomenal group of organizations in this city, nonprofits, who are doing some really good things with our young people. How do we, I'll use the term, blow that up? How do we expand on that for our young people? How do we use all the facilities we have in the city? Our faith community have some gymnasiums and places to hold classes. Our school district has schools and buildings that could be utilized for youth programming. We need to do more of that. It needs to be a coordinated effort. It needs to be that we're not duplicating services, and we need to look at what are the gaps that we're missing in youth programming. The city should be the leader on that.
And then the final question that we have for you is, what is the best way to tackle the issues of blighted properties?
There are several things we need to do. First of all, we need to document where those blighted properties are and have record of those. And we need to research ownership of all those blighted properties. And then the city needs to be aggressive about taking over ownership of those blighted properties for the sole purpose of turning them around and focusing on home ownership. So what programs can we put into place so that we take those blighted properties and make sure they end up with somebody owning them as a home? An amazing statistic in our city is this: 27% of our housing stock is owner occupied. That means the rest of it is rental properties. If we're going to turn our neighborhoods around, if we're going to turn our communities around, we've got to increase home ownership in the city. Nothing says pride in your neighborhood like home ownership does. People want to have their own home. They want to be prideful about it, and they want to be a part of a community. We've got to get those blighted properties into the hands of people. What does that mean? I'm going to be setting up a commission on affordable housing and home ownership with emphasis on home ownership. And we need to have programs in the city for people who may not qualify for standard banking mortgages, but we need to have programs where people can get mortgages for these blighted properties and help them fix them up.
Is there anything else you want to elaborate on of the topics that we covered already?
Okay, there is. One other program that I'd like to briefly talk about is service districts. One of the things that I would do is break the city into districts. We've talked about blight. We've talked about crime. One of the big problems in a lot of our neighborhoods is trash. I would break the city into districts, and in each of those districts, we'd have a codes person, a safety person, a planning person, and a public works person. That would be the team assigned to that district, and they would be held accountable to work with the residents of that district to come up with a plan for that section of town, so that we can address a lot of those issues that I hear about at the door every night. Right now the city is structured like it was 50 years ago. It's very siloed. If you call the city, first of all, it's difficult to get somebody on the phone, and then secondly, to get somebody to return a message. If we set up those districts and put that team of 4 people from City Hall in place, that the residents know, here's their contact information, you're going to be working with them, because who knows better than what goes on in the neighborhoods than the residents themselves. And I've seen that by talking to so many people in the neighborhoods. That way, we can attack the very 4 problems that I hear about every night. Again, violent crime, trash, blight, and our roads. The neighbors know that. Let's work with them in a much smaller scale to help them improve those neighborhoods.
Are there any topics we haven't spoken about that you want to speak on?
Anything come to mind, Derek?
The opportunity that the future has in the city, I don't know, just where we could be.
Yeah. The piece we haven't talked about is, what does the future look like for the city of Harrisburg? We talk about a lot of the challenges and issues, and those challenges and issues and problems have been around for the last 8 years. No one's talking about them, especially the violent crime. No one in the mayor's office or City Hall is talking about it to resolve that. We can resolve those. Other cities have. I'm all about looking at other cities for best practices and bringing them here to help solve those issues. But then we need to talk about, what do we want to look like in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? That takes a vision, that takes a plan, and it takes action items of who we know we're going to hold accountable and where the money is going to come from to do that. That long-range plan needs to have buy-in and input from all our residents. We all need to be able to articulate what we want to look like in 20 years, and I, as mayor, would lead that planning to say, here's what we're going to do in the future. And I'll give you an example of how we did that. We're sitting here in Harrisburg University. Harrisburg University was envisioned back in the late 90s. And the whole reason we thought about this was we were losing businesses at a dramatic rate, especially our big businesses, our financial businesses, banking centers were moving out of town. That's when we said, what are we going to do as a group of business people? We came up with the idea of a residential university in downtown Harrisburg to help generate future workers in the technology industry, future businesses in the technology industry. Well, here we are 20 years later, 7,000 students downtown, 63% of them are students of color, and we're generating not only workers, we're now generating business ideas out of there. That's the kind of planning we need in the city. What do we want to be in 20 years, and how are we going to get there? And let's start working on that.